Happy summer, y'all.
Yeah, happy summer, Sarah. Happy summer to our listeners. So, yeah, season 1 of the Burnout Room is done and it's summer. And so now we are hard at work at season 2.
That's right. We are hard at work getting everything planned for season 2. And Courtney, we've got some really good episodes coming up.
Yeah, we do. We have a couple of pretty big interviews that we have planned. We've got a couple of really great episodes. So while we're hard at work on those over the summer, we didn't want to leave you guys without any of the Burnout Room in your feeds. So what we decided to do is just re-release some of our top hits from season 1. So we're going to start with episode 1, which is What is Burnout?
We thought that that'd be a really good way to kind of reground everybody in what burnout is and give you a taste of what our stories are, how Courtney and I came to do this work. So we hope that you'll take the time this week to rewatch episode 1 and make sure you stick around until the end because our favorite segment of every episode, the Ripples of Gratitude, takes place then, and we really want you to check those out.
Yeah, that's where we are intentionally thankful to someone or something with the hope that it ripples throughout our community. So please stay to the end of the episode and enjoy this re-release of episode 1 of the Burnout Room. What is burnout?
We'll see you in season 2.
Welcome to the Burnout Room, a podcast about burnout, effective leadership, and well-being in nonprofits.
I'm Dr. Courtney Keim, a workplace wellness researcher and professor.
And I'm Sarah Burress, an organizational leader and nonprofit wellness advocate.
Whether you're facing burnout, leading a team, or working to build a healthier workplace, this is your space to find support, community, and solutions for any organization.
On today's episode, we're going to talk about what burnout really is and why it's important for nonprofit organizations and their leaders to know how to manage it. We're also going to talk about our own personal burnout stories and how it shapes our work. Courtney, as our resident expert on workplace wellness, why don't you define burnout for us?
Sarah, I'm really glad that we're talking about this topic today because I think this is a topic that is very much misunderstood by a lot of people. When you think about burnout, I think a lot of people think about burnout as being tired. I'm just too tired to work. I'm stressed out at work and I just don't know how to cope with my stress. I'm just really bad at handling stress. It's usually directed back to the person and not recognizing that what burnout actually is job related. Burnout is related to the actual job, not the person. So when we think about the kind of definition of burnout that is used in the research, we think about burnout as being a prolonged, long-term, chronic, ongoing stressors on the job that's leading to these 3 components. The first is emotional and physical exhaustion, just having nothing left to give, being so tired physically and emotionally. And that's generally what we think of when we think of burnout. But it's also depersonalization. It's becoming cynical. It's becoming negative, kind of that negative Nancy person in the office. You're just always looking at the worst view of everything. And reduce personal accomplishments. You're kind of dialing down the effort. You're dialing down the motivation. You become unhappy with work. You stop like trying as hard in your job.
This sounds familiar.
Right. I mean, I think that this is familiar. Of course, this is something that most of us have probably experienced at some part of our jobs. And you may have experienced this and thought it's me and maybe not realized that it's not you. It's the job. And so, I mean, how do we know that it's the job? Well, we've been doing research on burnout for a couple of decades. And where burnout research really started was in caregiving and service occupations. Burnout researchers, they thought, what jobs tend to have people who are very burned out? Where are the jobs that are very demanding, that are very client-centered and client-driven? And you might think of things like, I mean, what would you think, Sarah, if you had to guess what those fields would be?
I mean, if I had to guess, I'm going to say something in healthcare.
Exactly. Right. Something where you've got a client or a patient and you are having to provide mental health care or physical health care. Yeah. Caregiving service occupations like in healthcare. So yeah, let's start there. Let's go and research those people and let's try to figure out what it is about that gosh darn healthcare industry that just makes everybody so burned out. And what the researchers found is when they started interviewing healthcare workers, they weren't talking about the patient care necessarily. They were starting to talk about things such as work overload, how many hours they were working, work demands, the things that they were being asked to do, the toxic workplaces, and how those people were handling all of that, how they started reducing their personal accomplishment. They started detaching from work. So these researchers started to like go out a little bit and say, oh, maybe this is also be happening in things like IT work, in the military, and other manager or even clerical positions. They started to see that this work overload and these toxic workplaces can happen in other places besides service industries. I mean, it is true that like some jobs do tend to have higher burnout than other jobs, like in general, on average.
Sure.
And that is things like, as you could probably imagine, like teachers and mental health workers and service workers.
Yeah. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that healthcare workers are often working in emergent situations and probably are really trained to provide patient care. We're not, I mean, I don't know that they're talking about like be prepared for the workplace that you're walking into to be mismanaged.
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
insert issue here. Yeah.
Right. And I think too that it's just kind of a given that in healthcare, if you're a resident, you're going to work 60 hours a week and you just work a 12-hour shift. And that's just what we work in these organizations. And there is, it's not necessary. I think people think it's the work that they're doing, and they may not recognize that it's not only about the work that they're doing. It's also about the way that the work is structured around them.
Right.
Yeah. So if you think about like what the research does show, not surprisingly, high workload is the most significant predictor of burnout. If you are working excessively, if you are working 40, 50, 60, 70, 80-hour work weeks, that is going to lead to, guess what, physical and emotional exhaustion. If you have too much work to do, not enough time to do it, that time pressure, this must be done by this day, that is significantly related to burnout. But guess what else is? Having a job where you're not giving a sense of autonomy or control over how you get to do your work, not having positive feedback. So your boss never tells you that you're doing a good job. No one ever says to you, thanks for the work that you're doing. There is no systematic reward that's given. You're not included in any kind of important decision-making in the organization. You're in a community, you're in a workplace that has no sense of community. You don't have that support from your coworkers or from your boss, like the lack of social support. There's, not the sense of, I don't know about you, but like the best jobs that I've had in my life have been situations where I've been able to commiserate with the people who I am with and to be able to laugh with them and kind of get through tough times together.
Yeah, most definitely. I think some of the like longest standing friendships that I've made are with people that I have worked with in the past. I think that you go through hard times in your organization and you kind of bond with those people over that. So I definitely agree. I think having people that you can commiserate with, like you said, when things are tough, but laugh and joke around when things are easy. Like I think that is such an important point.
Yes. And it might matter if you have a sense of like connection and trust that you build with your employer because of the sense of like community and camaraderie and belonging that you can feel by working in a healthy workplace instead of one that's leading to burnout. There's also a lack of sense of fairness. Like if you feel like decision making is happening at a very unjust level, I think the research shows that we as human beings, we have a pretty like innate sense of justice and fairness. Like just ask a toddler that's being asked to like share their toy. Like this is so unfair. We have a sense of like what is fair and what should be happening. And so when you work for a place where those basic violations of equity are and respect are not being given, that also can be a significant predictor. And then the last one is that the lack of being able to fulfill your personal goals. You're not able to set goals and achieve goals. We are very goal-oriented people. We as human beings, we like to set goals. Most video games know this about us and they prey on us about that. Even my Duolingo knows this about me, and it knows that I will do that extra thing today because I have a goal of having so many XP points by the end of the day. This is what we do as humans. And when we set professional goals, it feels good for us to meet those goals and to grow and to succeed. And especially if that growth can be aligned with our organization's values. When you don't have that, you're going to be much more likely to experience burnout. These things are important, I think, for us to understand what causes burnout, because what happens when people feel burnout is really significant. And I think you're definitely going to feel this more deeply in nonprofit organizations. When people feel burned out, the research says they are going to withdraw from their job. They are going to call in sick. They're going to be absent from their job. Maybe they come to work, but they're not really working. We call that presenteeism. They are going to look for another job. We call that turnover intention, or they're going to leave. They're going to turn over and actually leave the organization. And that can be really costly, especially for nonprofits that are short-staffed. And you're losing a lot of intellectual property when you have good workers that are leaving because they're burned out. For the people who stay, burnout is also not great. So even if they don't leave, we know that burnout is going to lead to lower job performance, lower productivity, lower job satisfaction, less commitment to the employer. And burnout can also be contagious. When people feel burned out in an organization, that kind of, especially if they have that cynicism component, that can like lead and seep out into other parts of the workplace. It causes conflict between coworkers. And it also can spill over into people's personal lives. You can become like not a great person to be around in your home life as well because of the burnout that you're experiencing. So this burnout is affecting the person who's feeling it, as well as the organization, as well as the people who are connected to those workers and the organization.
I think that's a really great point. I'm going to tell my burnout story later, and I'm going to tell you about how not a pleasant person I was to be around during my period of burnout, because it seeps into all facets of your life. And I think that a lot of our listeners right now, especially those that are in nonprofit organizations, are shaking their heads as you're defining what burnout is, because that doesn't just feel like a definition to me. It feels like our reality. Nonprofits have always dealt with burnout issues. Lately, though, since the pandemic, it kind of feels like the volume's been cranked up to like 1,000.
Yeah.
A national survey from the National Council of Nonprofits found that half of nonprofit leaders say that stress and burnout were a big reason for their staffing shortages, which totally makes sense. People are going through periods of burnout. Nonprofits don't have resources or policies in place to help folks navigate through burnout. They quit and they leave the sector.
Yeah.
We've also seen other recent studies from the Center for Effective Philanthropy that show that 95% of nonprofit leaders say that burnout is a huge concern in their organizations. A third say that it's a major concern in their organizations. Yeah. And 90% of those leaders say that they're worried about their own burnout because of financial uncertainty and workplace instability. So this isn't a small issue that we're talking about. Burnout really is a defining challenge in our sector, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, when I first saw that statistic, I was kind of blown away by it, but it's also not surprising, right? This is the reality of what nonprofits are having to deal with. I would say it is the issue. Mm-hmm. It's the issue of the day for nonprofits is this burnout. And again, I want for people who are listening to this to be able to understand that burnout is not necessarily something that you must feel because you work at a nonprofit. Just because you work at a nonprofit doesn't mean burnout is inevitable. There are things that you can do to address some of those causes of burnout that I just talked about that can help to alleviate this really like critical problem that nonprofits are having right now.
Right. And I mean, it's like you said earlier, when staff leave or they disengage from the work, it ripples throughout the organization very quickly. It causes delays in programming. It causes heavier workloads for remaining staff. I mean, ultimately, it's a loss of impact in our communities. And that's why we work at nonprofits. We're mission-driven people trying to do good works in our communities. So mitigating burnout in nonprofits really affects our missions and the work that we do in our state, Kentuckians. Um, so as I'm thinking about nonprofits specifically and why burnout hits them so hard, I'm thinking about like four things really jump out at me. And the first is resource constraints. A lot of nonprofits are working on shoestring budgets with very minimal staff. So you've got a few people with heavy workloads making little money, trying to manage all of the programming for the organization. The other is mission pressure. I know I succumb to mission pressures. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But as purpose-driven people, nonprofit employees tend to push ourselves past what I would consider healthy boundaries for work because we know how important the work is that we're doing, and we want to make sure that we're providing the services to the people in our community that the mission um, inspires us to serve. The other is emotional labor. And in many nonprofits, staff members are working with people in our community who are going through crisis situations, or they're working with people whose needs outpace available resources. And trying to manage that emotional weight becomes exhausting over time. And a lot of nonprofits don't necessarily have mechanisms to provide recognition for their staff or proper feedback or leadership development. So over time, staff members can feel underappreciated or invisible
Yeah.
to
And I
their
think it's,
leaders.
yeah, sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's
I
okay.
think that one of the things that you just said is like key. Yes, some jobs have greater emotional labor because of the kind of work that they are doing. And yes, it is important to take care of yourself as someone who has to deal with that kind of emotional labor. But it's also about the structures that are put in place
Right.
by the organization for how you deal with that, how you handle that. It's about feedback. It's about recognition. It's about how the leaders create structure for development. So all of those things you just said, again, it's like, it's not inevitable that because you do tough things that therefore you must be burned out. But I think because so many nonprofits are in this space of mission and I must take care of these people, and taking care of these people causes me so much emotional labor. It's like they're more susceptible. It's a risk factor, if you will, for burnout, but it doesn't mean that it has to happen.
Right. And I think the last piece that I'll bring up is one that really we have, like, organizational leaders have no control over. And those are things like legislation or executive orders that change the function of our organizations, or it's shifting grant opportunities, or it's donor pressures. Stuff like that just creates this environment of constant flux. And I don't know if you know this, Courtney, but nonprofits really don't like to change. So trying to maintain your operations in an environment that feels like it's constantly moving at a rapid pace is really challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not just nonprofits. I would say most people don't like change. And specifically, the thing we don't like about change is the uncertainty. So
Right.
it's not just that we have to change our structure because our funding sources have changed. We have to change like our organizational structure because our funding sources have changed. But it's also like not knowing if those funding sources will exist next year. How is this affecting our budget for this year? Where, yes, we have money now. And I think that some of those, the reports that you mentioned earlier, talk about this in more detail about how right now, I think a lot of nonprofits are like, we're okay now, but
Mhm.
we have enough money for this year, for this quarter, but we're not sure what's going to happen in the very near future. And that uncertainty can be incredibly stressful.
Especially for leaders who are having to consider potential layoffs for their staff. I think that that's a piece that we don't necessarily think too much about when we talk about grant funding going away. But a lot of our staff, a lot of nonprofit staff members are grant funded, and losing that funding causes, again, more work for people who remain on staff. So I think that there's pieces there too.
Yeah. Yeah. And this stuff, I think you and I would both say that we really think that this matters, and it matters a great deal here in Kentucky specifically.
Definitely. Roughly 1 in 10 Kentuckians are employed at a nonprofit. 1 in 10 people. It's the fourth largest employment sector in the state. So I think when we see burnout running rampant through this sector, it's like you said earlier, it doesn't just affect the individual that's going through burnout. It doesn't just affect the organization of that person. It affects our community.
Yeah. And that's why we're passionate. That's why we want to do this work, is because we are hoping that the work that we're doing and the stories that we're telling are going to be ones that are going to shine a light on the personal experiences of people that are going through burnout. And that by sharing these personal examples and stories, that it will maybe spark something in a nonprofit leader or someone, a staff person, to approach their nonprofit leader and say, hey, maybe we could do things a little bit differently around here. Are there small changes that we could make that could make a significant impact that will impact me and the organization and my family and ultimately my community, which Kentucky depends so heavily on the nonprofit sector for the betterment of our communities?
Most definitely. I think I hope that organizational leaders hear these stories and feel a little more receptive when they have their staff members come to them and say, let's make change. Because again, I'm an organizational leader and I don't like to change. I don't like things to change because things have been working just fine for 15 years. But we have to make changes. We have to make sure that we're taking care of the people who are doing the work and serving our fellow community members. So I think you're totally right with that, Courtney. And so as we move forward and we're talking about stories, I'm wondering if you might be willing to share your burnout story with us.
Yeah, I'm happy to share this story because it does lead to kind of a happy ending at the end. So I'll weave our way to get to that happy ending here. But I was a brand new, naive, recent graduate with my psychology degree after college. And I was ready to change the world, as you are when you are young and out of college. And I loved my psychology major. I really wanted to see this applying to make people's lives better. And I also needed a job and needed a way to pay my bills. So through some networking at my university, I was able to get a job pretty quickly working for a nonprofit that had, amongst other things, besides foster care services, they also had a residential treatment facility for young boys in the state of Tennessee, where I grew up. And I was excited about this job. I was like, here I am. I have my psych major. I'm going to go in. I'm going to help these kids, right? Like, I love children. I love psychology. This makes so much sense for me to go and help these kids. And it was a tough job. This nonprofit had a significant turnover problem. And I was supposed to work 3 days a week, but because they were so short-staffed, those 3 days a week were nights and weekends. Plus, I was supposed to do one overnight shift because they didn't have enough workers to work the overnight shift. So they were trying to make the people working second shift basically do third shift 1 day a week to address their turnover issues. They're mandated by law to have so many people watching these kids at one time, and they couldn't do that because of staffing. And by the way, to the tune of like $20,000 a year. So like the lowest possible amount of money that you could be making at that time. And I was still excited about this job. I was supposed to go in and do a 2-week training session. And I love a training. Give me a test and I will ace it. Like, I'm so good at this. I got CPR certified. I learned how to do de-escalation techniques. I learned how to put a kid in a hold if he was hurting himself or someone else. And I passed every test with flying colors. However, that 2-week training, because they were so short-staffed, they put us into the residential houses after 1 week. So I was really actually severely undertrained. And as we all know, training doesn't always lead to behavior on the job. So I was still naive and thought, well, this 1 week of training, I can go in and take care of these boys, these 8-year-old boys that are, arguably have experienced some of the worst trauma that children can experience if they're away from their families and they are living in a residential treatment facility. These are the kids that really need a lot of help. And as soon as I got on the job, it was not but a couple of days into this work that I realized I was in way over my head. I know that I was a young, naive little thing, and that my coworkers who had been at this organization for some time, they clocked me immediately. They knew that I was not going to last. And I think that they said, let's just make the inevitable happen sooner. Let's just speed this up. So I feel like they did everything they could to get me out of this organization as fast as possible. So they would purposefully leave me alone with like the quote worst kids in the group or in the class. And I remember one time walking the kids over to the dining hall for their dinner, and we were walking back. And again, purposefully, my coworkers left me alone with this really bad kid. And I did not remember any of my training. My training went completely out the window because this kid was not doing what he was supposed to be told. I'd been hearing horror stories about these kids are going to attack you. You're going to get hurt. People would share injury stories. It was just very traumatic. And this troublemaker kid, he wasn't even really doing anything that bad, but he was not following my instructions. And we were getting further and further separated from the group. And I was like, you need to walk forward. And I started to freak out that he was going to like try to run away. This place is not fenced in, by the way. These kids can go anywhere they need to go. This isn't a prison. And I panicked and started on the walkie-talkie, code red, like, and then all of a sudden, like a swarm of people came in because they thought that there was a code red situation that was happening. There was not a code red situation that was happening. And my stress level at this time was just through the roof, right? Like I was a 10 out of 10, freaking out. And all of this kid is watching this happen. All the other kids are seeing this happen from across the campus. And now they all know that I'm weak. They know I'm weak.
You can smell it in the water.
They can smell it in the water. These kids know. So now they know that they can be bad around me, that they can misbehave, and that I don't know how to fix it or what to do. My coworkers did not jump in and help me. My supervisor did not jump in and help me. I was just left to my own devices. And again, the stress level was just so high. So I'm supposed to stay the night that night. I'm supposed to now, at the end of my shift at 11 o'clock, sleep at this place with these kids in this building. I'm in the same building with them. The counselors' bedrooms were just down the hall from where the kids were. And I'm supposed to be up all night, like watching these kids as well. And I can remember just being in a total panic and contacting my supervisor and saying, I can't do this. I can't do this. And again, because they were so short-staffed, instead of saying this is not a good fit, thank you so much, and telling, my supervisor kind of showing me the door, he was like, well, that's fine. We'll get somebody else to stay the night. Can you come back tomorrow? I said, sure, that's fine. I'll come back tomorrow. So I did, and I returned. And I stuck it out. I was doing it for a couple of weeks, and every day was just the stress level was so high. I wasn't supported. I had no personal goals that were being met here. And I can remember specifically one day that I will never forget from my memory. I drove up to the campus. I think I had to be there at 7 a.m. on the weekends is when my shift started. And I can remember pulling into the parking lot, which was very close to the cabin. I could park right by the cabin. And getting out of the car, and I could hear the kids like screaming in the building. And they weren't screaming like in terror. They were screaming in joy and chaos. And I could just tell that something was happening in the cabin. And I was there about 10 minutes early. And I'm ashamed to say, a little bit ashamed to say, that instead of going in and helping my coworkers who were dealing with a crisis, I went and got back in my car. And I sat there for 10 minutes watching the clock. And I said, I'm not walking into that building until it's time for my shift. And you may say like, oh, that sounds like a good boundary that you're setting. That's going to help you with burnout. No. Because I was just delaying the inevitable, which was getting into this really high stress job at 7 o'clock. And I don't really want to say, because who knows, our listeners could be, they could be having their dinner, they could be enjoying a nice experience. So I'm not going to say exactly what was happening in the room when I walked into the building, but suffice to say, it was just really gross. There was a boy that was doing something very gross, and all of the other kids were reacting to that and freaking out and going crazy. And I just remember thinking, this place is out of control. And I don't think that I am designed for this. I think I didn't sign up for this. maybe I need to get out of this. But again, what am I going to do? I don't know what my other alternatives are. What else am I going to do with my psychology degree? I realized that being in that building was so much stress, and I had to find a way to, any way to alleviate the stress. And one of the things that I realized was when I was in the cabin with these boys, the only time that I felt relief from the stress, besides like going on a lunch break or being able to leave at the end of the shift, because I never stayed the night, by the way. I never got to a point where the stress was manageable enough that I could even stay the night there. But I realized that when I went to the bathroom is when my stress, I could get a little bit of relief from that stress. And so I started drinking water like crazy. I don't think I have ever been so hydrated before in my entire life. I'm not kidding you. I had like a big jug of water and I was just chugging it because I also had enough integrity that I didn't want to say, I need to go to the bathroom, and I didn't actually have to go to the bathroom. So I just drank a lot of water, and then I would just go to the bathroom, and I would just be like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. I've got to get out of this. After about 6 weeks of this, I made it 6 weeks. I had lost 10 pounds at a time when I didn't really have 10 pounds to lose. This was not a very safe way to lose weight. And my anxiety was so low. I knew that I had to quit, but like the guilt was eating me alive because these were boys who had been quit on their entire lives. And me being a person who would also quit them was really hard for me. And you remember the kid where we were walking from the cafeteria, the really bad kid that I did the code red on? That kid, I found out he was really bad. He was one of the worst ones, but I realized that he liked to be read to at the end of the night. And if he had a good day, I told him, if you have a good day, I'll read a chapter of a book to you at the end of the night. And we had started to kind of bond a little bit, and he was having a lot of good days. And I was like, I can't believe I am about to leave this kid. And so I really can commiserate with people who work at nonprofits who just don't want to quit those people. They don't want to quit the clients. They are so bought into the mission. But I knew that there was just the structure of this workplace was in such a way that I was not going to be able to get away from this burnout. So I quit. After 6 weeks, I quit, and I quit that boy, and I quit all of those kids who were in that cabin. And it really, it taught me a lot about myself. So that's the sad thing, but here's how it ends up being like kind of a positive story in the end. That experience, it was the first time that I had really failed at something in my life in such a very obvious way. This was an obvious failing. And I couldn't understand that because I felt like I had a good work ethic. I was a good person. And it really made me reconsider my career path as a child psychologist. That it did not end up happening, of course. But I did start to think very deeply about workplaces and how can you design workplaces that can help people to be successful. I started to realize that maybe that occupational health and industrial organizational psychology path was the better one for me. And now I can think about how designing research studies and going in and doing consulting with nonprofits and other organizations, I really see that like if I can go in and do an intervention or help in some kind of way, that people might not have to feel the way that I felt in that job. Like these are real people with real feelings in a real situation that's affecting them as well as their families and all of the other, parts of their life. And so it changed the trajectory of my career. And now it's given me that kind of drive to like, in a very Pollyanna kind of way, but like really to try to find a way to make workplaces better so that people don't have to experience the burnout that I felt in that job.
There were a couple of things that stood out to me. So I took like just a handful of notes while you were talking. And the first thing I wrote was hazing ?
Sure.
I'm just like, I guess it's not totally outside the realm of possibility that like this is just happening in other nonprofits and I don't know about it. But let's not set each other up to fail. I just like that's wild to me because I guess you could see like somebody green coming into this work after you've been battle tested after years on the job and things like that and say, oh, this person's not going to make it. But let's support each other when we're doing hard work.
Yes, that community piece that I talked about, not having a sense of community in your workplace is a predictor of burnout. And unfortunately for us in our world, in our community, I mentioned that like teachers and healthcare providers have high levels of burnout. Guess which industries are also overly represented in the research on workplace incivility?
What are those?
It's education and healthcare. So when we want to do, when you look at a lot of the research on bullying and hazing, you will see it unfortunately come up in places like nursing and education and social work and other areas. So yes, you're exactly right. Hazing, terrible idea. Like let's don't try to create environments where we're bringing people down and not letting our coworkers succeed. I could have been really good at that job. I think if I went back and did it today, I might actually be good at that job if it was the right kind of environment. It's not a personal failure of mine. It's not something that I wasn't, I don't have the right temperament or personality for it. I think if I had the right kind of support, I could have stayed and been really good at that work.
Another thing that really stood out to me was you talking about how you were supposed to have 2 weeks of training and then it was cut down to one. And I think that's another thing that nonprofit organizations could really grow and get better at is onboarding and training folks, because so often we're just trying to get the stuff done that we have to get done, right? Our community partners, our members, whomever we're serving, they're depending on us to get things done. And I don't have time to like teach this person the ropes. Like I have to do my job. But we see it highlighted in your story how important it would have been for you to have that additional week of training. And I mean, I know you love a test. You would have loved a second week of training.
Yes, I should have had better training. And again, this is where I look back at not just this workplace experience, but all of these workplace experiences that I had before I became a little IO psychologist. I've been a little IO psychologist all along. So I even then recognized that like there are things that this organization is doing that are wrong. So yes, 2 weeks of training down to 1 week of training, not good. Lack of coworker support, not good. So yeah, I'm glad that you've hit on these highlights so far. What's your third thing that you wrote down?
It's one word, and it's guilt. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when we get to my story. But boy, howdy, when you're a nonprofit employee and you really care about the mission of your organization and you find yourself in burnout, whether you can identify that that's what it is or not, the shame and the guilt that comes along with that is really heavy.
It's so heavy and it's so hard. I should not have continued to put myself in such a precarious situation. It was really bad for my mental and physical health. But man, that guilt was just eating me alive. I couldn't walk away from those kids. I finally did. And you may say like 6 weeks is nothing, but boy, to a 21-year-old, 6 weeks is an eternity. And that was a long time for me to be in a really bad situation because of this guilty feeling that I had. And I think you are absolutely right. When you are someone who's so mission driven and you are someone who believes deeply in the mission, vision, values of your nonprofit organization and the people that you're serving, trying to take time for yourself or demand things for yourself or find a better job for yourself can make you feel an incredible amount of guilt.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's just very heavy.
Yeah.
It's just a very heavy feeling.
Yeah, but I do think that I did learn a lot about myself, as I said, and I'm glad that I don't want to say glad it happened to me, but I realized the benefit of that having happened to me, that I now get to tell that story to my students. I get to share that story, here with you today in a way that helps to educate other people about these workplace phenomenon. It changed the trajectory of my life. And I've also had other crappy bosses and other toxic workplaces in other places. But I thought that this nonprofit story specifically would be a good one to share because I do think it highlights the lack of personal growth, the lack of autonomy, the work overload. Certainly, I should not have been asked to work third shift on top of second shift. This was really not a great environment. And then that lack of community. Yeah, it was really bad. And maybe one day, so the story actually doesn't end there, but we'll have to talk about that at a different time. But I actually did end up back at that organization later on, a few years later. Maybe one day I'll tell the rest of that story on the podcast. But yeah, Sarah, I thinking about my story, I know that your story has some things that are overlapping with my story as well, and I would love for our listeners to be able to hear about your story, which does have a really happy ending.
Yeah, I think the first thing that really comes to mind to me as a stark difference in our stories is that, as you mentioned, like your story took place in 6 weeks worth of time, whereas my story kind of developed over a couple of years. So I'm going to give you just some quick context before I get to my, the point where I was like, okay, something's really wrong here. So in 2018, I was promoted to the position that I'm in now, which I was very honored to have been, asked to move up in this way because I really love my organizations. But part of the roles and responsibilities of this job included things like financial oversight, which is something that I had never done and skills that I had never developed. So that was interesting. And I was trying to learn on the job for that. Fast forward to 2019, and we were going through a leadership transition. Our longtime and beloved executive director stepped away from our organization, and we had a wonderful transition team, but it was a new dynamic to try and navigate. And those folks certainly did not sign up for what happened in early 2020, which is the world shutting down. Global pandemic hits, and like a lot of nonprofits who, again, do not like change, were dealing with having to move all of their in-person, like we were trying to move all of our in-person events into virtual events. We were moving all of our processes into virtual processes. It was a mess and it was a really hard time. And we were working at I was probably working at unhealthy levels at that point. We were all quarantined and working from home, and I live in a tiny house in the middle of the woods with my kids, and we don't have traditional internet. So I'm trying to run Zoom meetings and my kids' school on a mobile hotspot, and things are crazy. So 2020 is 2020ing, and we are um, being led by a transitional leadership team. We did end up hiring a wonderful executive director in October of 2020, but we were still working at just like really hectic levels, right? We're just trying to stay on top of everything. At that point, our foundation, the Kentucky Psychological Foundation, which Courtney and I, this is what we're doing here. We're hanging out. Courtney is the president of the Kentucky Psychological Foundation. During 2020 and 2021, that was when I feel like we really had a big push to go public with that organization and provide a lot of resources to the public, credible resources, so that folks could find information about taking care of their mental health during the pandemic. So we were not only trying to maintain the current programs that we had and transitioning our programs from an in-person to a virtual place, but we were also trying to build upon programs and try new things. And so through 2021, we were still working, had a really heavy workload. 2022 hits, and I'm like, yes, it's time to slow down. Things are good. This is going to be our post-pandemic year, all of that. Things did not slow down. Things just kept going at the same pandemic pace that we had been going at. So, you know, still rushing through to do stuff, still having a million things to do. We still only had 4 part-time staff people. We've expanded programs. Regulations that were put in place during the pandemic were then rescinded. So we were scrambling, trying to figure out what that looked like for our members and our membership organization side. It was just a lot to balance. And then in the summer of 2022, so start burnout story here. This is really where everything kind of culminates. In 2022, we started going back to like hybrid work. So we'd be in the office some, but then we'd also be working remotely. And I really loved being in the office with people after being quarantined in a tiny house with only my family. And I know everybody has similar stories, but I really needed to be around other people. So I really appreciated that I was able to come back to work with the folks that, I had a great community here in my organization. So I was happy to be back with them. But then the summer of 2022 hit, and I have young kids, and childcare is unaffordable for me. And so I'm going to work from home over the summer. And that was not a good idea for me.
Right.
That was not a good idea for me. And I found myself, I just remember pulling up my laptop and pulling up my emails and looking at my inbox at the 213 emails sitting in there, some read, some unread, all things that I had to do something with, and just feeling like stuck. Like I don't even know where to start with this. I don't have any motivation to do this. I I'm just going to sit here and stare at my inbox because maybe these emails will answer themselves and I won't have to deal with it. And I really started to notice the work that I was completing was not up to the standards that I hold for myself. I know I love this work. I've loved working for these organizations for almost 2 decades. The work that I'm doing is not good enough. I'm missing deadlines. Like I just felt so bad. And then the guilt starts to set in, right? People are depending on me. I'm like a supervisor in my organization. I've got people that are depending on me to do my work. And that's not even including the people externally from our organizations who depend on the services that we're providing. So the shame and the guilt hit me very hard. And so I sat with that, and I didn't know at the time that that's what burnout was. I just thought something was wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
Like with me, like I did something wrong. I need to, I need to meditate, or I need to do yoga,
Right.
or I
Right.
need to, and I did try those things and I still do those things, and they're wonderful for your mental health. And you should definitely do those things, but they didn't fix what was wrong with me at work. So as I'm descending into this really dark, burnouty place, I'm seeing it seep into my home life, the way that I'm interacting with my kids and with my spouse. I'm just not a happy person to be around. And hopefully, our listeners will get to know me and will know that that is the furthest from who I am as a person. I am very positive. I really care about being a positive person. And I was not a positive person in the summer of 2022. I was probably miserable to be around. So the summer is coming to an end. My kids are going back to school. I'm coming back to the office, and I know that something's got to give. I I can't keep staring at my screen hoping my emails answer themselves, or that task that has to get done is going to get done without me having to do it. So I went in to have a check-in with my boss, and I sat down across from him, across his desk, and I said, "It's really hard for me to say this, but I'm being a really bad employee right now. And I don't know what's wrong with me, but I need your help."
Mm.
And we should talk about at some point on this podcast about the trust that I was able to have in my executive director to say that out loud to him. Like, this is the person that signs my paychecks.
Yep.
And going to that person and saying, "Hey, I'm doing a real bad job at this thing you're paying me for. But will you please keep paying me?" So that, and the psychological safety that I had with my boss in order to have that conversation, because it was really vulnerable. I was coming from a very vulnerable place. And I've had conversations with other people who have gone through burnout, and this could have gone one of two ways. It could have gone with my leader saying, "Well, you need to figure this out. Like, I need you to figure this out. Take a day off, get yourself back together, and then come back to work." Or it could have gone the way that it went, which was my executive director said, "First thing we need to do is schedule regular check ins. What day of the week works for you?" So we started scheduling regular check ins. And then the next thing he said was, "Next week, when you come for your regular check in, I want you to bring all of the tasks that are on your plate. And we're going to look at them, and we're going to look at the amount of work that you're doing in comparison to the amount of time that you're supposed to be working.
Yeah.
And then the next thing that he did was he said, I know that finances are giving you a lot of trouble because you are not trained in this. You've been learning on your own for the last several years, and this is not your forte. We're going to bring in a financial consultant to teach you how to do this so that you can feel successful at your job. And by him doing those three things, it was slowly I was able to rebuild my confidence in my work. And I finally felt like I could breathe and enjoy my job again. And I mean, it didn't happen overnight. We did have to work at it. We had to check in often. He did mention to me many times that I have personal days and that I should be using them because I wasn't. But it never felt dismissive. When he was like, these are the steps that we're going to take, it never felt like he was just dismissing me and telling me to figure it out. And he was also not taking things off of my plate without me agreeing that they should come off my plate. Like he would say to me, hey, we have a board meeting on Friday. You can be at that meeting. We want you there. Your voice is important. But if you want to take a step back and not be on that meeting, that's also totally fine. Like if you want to spend that time working on stuff, you can do that. But if you want to come to the meeting, just know that your voice is valuable and we want you there. So I think there were a lot of good things that my boss, who happens to be a psychologist, knew to do to help me navigate through burnout. And I think that when I look at how my burnout journey concluded versus the way a lot of people's burnout journeys conclude, that's really what ignited this thing inside of me that wanted to do workplace wellness and nonprofits. It was the way that he treated me during that time, the way that he helped me navigate through that. I want other leaders to have those resources so that people like me who are really dedicated to the missions of their organizations can work through burnout if they're finding themselves in burnout. And also provide resources to leaders to help mitigate burnout so we don't get there in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. I love your story so much. I've heard it multiple times, and every time you tell it, I appreciate it so much. And I think there are so many good lessons to learn because you were not in a high stress, I'm about to be attacked at any moment job. But yet what our stories have in common is that heavy, heavy workload. You did have an incredible amount of work that needed to be done. And I love that the executive director of KPF was able to identify, he had a strategy for bring me your tasks and let's look at your time and let's see if those things line up in the way that they should, or you being asked to do something that is impossible. I also love that he gave you a lot of autonomy and control. Here are things that you get to choose to do. You can either go to this board meeting or don't go to this board meeting. It is your time. You use the time in a way that makes the most sense to you. I love that the community was there. We did lose a sense of community during quarantine and you working from home over the summer. I mean, look, I've got multiple people in my family who they work from home. And I think that you can have an entirely work from home force and employees and still develop and have community. But you have to be incredibly more intentional about the way that you do that. It can happen a little bit more organically when you are back in the office in person, when you have that space to be able to do the work that you need to, and also the person who is there who can give you that sense of community and connection. The growth and accomplishment that you were able to get by having to be taught to do financial planning, which is something that you didn't really know how to do. And now this new role was asking you to do this. I mean, it really is hitting on so many of the things that we know that can cause burnout that I think that the executive director was able to address without having to spend more money, or at least not a whole lot more money, right? These were small changes, weekly check-ins, looking over the tasks that you had to do, rearranging tasks that may have cost money to do the financial training piece, but there was still a lot of that was just free. These are things that leaders can do very easily. And the other thing that I wanted to mention about your story was that when I talked about the three components of what burnout is, you can have high levels of any of those three and be burned out. So you can have high levels of reduced personal accomplishment, which I know that's kind of silly to say, high levels of reducing your personal accomplishment. But essentially what I'm saying is like you were looking at your emails, not answering them. You're staring at them saying, I can't, this is too much. And you also can have that feeling of exhaustion without having the cynicism. You don't have to be cynical to be burned out. You can be but you can be high on all three, and that's bad. Obviously, that's the worst.
Yeah, that's really bad.
That's the real bad one. but you can also be cynical, but still be doing your job very well and also exhausted. So there's different like profiles or levels. And I think maybe in a future episode, we'll maybe talk a little bit more about what those profiles look like. But I did want to mention that now because I think your story is a good example. I don't remember you ever, I know that you were down on yourself and you were disappointed in yourself and you were feeling like shame and guilt, but I don't remember you ever being cynical about the work or the organization. Like you never had levels of that cynicism that certainly others of us have felt about the kind of work that we were doing. And now looking back on it, like I'm not sure how cynical I was about the work that I was doing. I think I had so much naivete that I still thought I was going to change the world working with those kids. But I definitely was cynical about the way that things were happening at the organization. But your example is one where I think you were incredibly overworked, high levels of exhaustion, low personal accomplishment, but you were still the wonderful, happy Sarah, positive Sarah, but you weren't as positive maybe as we all know you to be. You weren't feeling as positive as you usually are, but you weren't, it's not like you became like a terribly cynical person during that time.
I think some of that had to do with just the environment that I was in with my organization. Like I said, I have been at my organization since 2007. So I have been here helping to develop the culture of our organization over time. And so I kind of make myself a comfy little house and I'm going to live in it basically. So I think that because I had been so entrenched in the creation of that culture, and I knew that my organization wasn't out to get me. They weren't like, I didn't feel any sense of like I was being targeted or hazed through any of this. It was really just, I have too much. This is too much and I can't manage it. And because I can't manage it, it just went downhill. It was like, I can't even pinpoint for you where it started. I just knew that one day I woke up and I'm like, this is bad and
Yeah.
something's wrong with me. And that's how I framed it in my brain. Because again, at that point, I didn't know what burnout was. I don't even, and I've worked with mental health professionals. I've worked with psychologists for forever. But my context for burnout was I'm so burned out. Like I'm so burned out. People say that on social media or whatever, but like burnout again is a workplace phenomenon. So I didn't know that that's what it was. I thought it was a me problem. Like
Mm-hmm.
something's wrong with me. And the more conversations I had with my executive director, the conversations that I had with you after that in developing the programming that we've developed for the Kentucky Psychological Foundation, that's really when for me it was like, this is burnout. Burnout is really bad
Yeah.
and we can mitigate it in our organizations. We just need the tools to do it.
Yeah. Do you remember coming up to me at our spring academic conference for KPF? You came up to me, I think during lunch or something. We had an open event, and you came up to me and you said, "I want for no one to ever feel the way that I have felt." You had like a fire behind you, a passion that you now knew. You had some words for what this phenomenon was. You knew now that this was burnout. And you were like, no nonprofit employee needs to feel this way. This is terrible. What can we do? I want to start a program. And that's really, I mean, that's how this all began. This podcast wouldn't even be here if you hadn't experienced this burnout, if you didn't have your own burnout story. So that, I mean, this is why we're doing this, right? We're doing this podcast, and also the entire nonprofit wellness program that we are developing through KPF is because of these experiences that we've had and our sincere desire for other people to not be experiencing what we felt.
Exactly. So I'm a person that believes like we're always learning through our entire lives. And so I did take some time to reflect on my story just independently before I had come to you that during that conference. And I do remember that really well. Um, and I just like that's literally how I felt. I don't want anyone in any nonprofit ever to ever feel the way that I felt and not have a leader like mine who can help them navigate out of it. Because I haven't mentioned this, but my spouse was also employed at a nonprofit, and he went through his own burnout scenario shortly after I was coming out of mine, and he did not have a supportive leader that could help him navigate his way out of it, and he quit that job and he left the sector. And we, as nonprofits in Kentucky, again, 1 in 10 people in Kentucky work for a nonprofit. It's the fourth largest employment sector. We cannot afford as nonprofits to lose passionate, mission driven people from our sector. So, how can we, as leaders in nonprofits, mitigate burnout? How can we support our people to ensure that we're keeping those folks at our organizations?
Yeah. And especially with nonprofits being so, having to be so financially conscious. It's not like you can hire an IO or OHP consultant to come in and pay them a ton of money to give everybody in your organization some kind of burnout assessment and develop an implementation plan. Those are great things to do
Yes.
if you can do them. But in our current time, with all of the financial headwinds that nonprofits are having to face right now, they just don't have the luxury of being able to pay consultants to come in. And yet we have all of this expertise from IO psychologists and occupational health psychologists. We have all of this science that's been done in the field that if nonprofit leaders and workers just, if they knew about them and knew about them in a digestible, easy to apply way, they could just get access to that information. They could make small but significant changes, small and large significant changes that could really make a difference in the lives of these workers and also of the community that we are serving. So that was really the precipitous reason why we wanted to start the nonprofit wellness program, which includes a ton of free available resources on KPF's website, all kinds of things about how to communicate with your employees, how nonprofit leaders can talk about change. There are resources that include things like templates and maybe some assessments as well. So, and that we're continuing to build and add to. But then we also recognize that how will people know about these toolkit that we have created and all of these resources that are on our website unless we tell them through, as it turns out, our podcast. So this was the precipitous reason for the podcast to exist. And I also do want to give a shout out to two students who were in my class who, because of a class project that we were doing for KPF, a lot of my students have created resources for this nonprofit wellness initiative. And I gave the students ultimate creative flexibility. And two of those students ended up coming up with the idea for doing the podcast. Brendan and Hunter, they said, you should do a podcast. You should call it the Burnout Room. And they started that idea. They did kind of 2 pilot episodes to showcase that this could be a thing that could be done. And I can remember when they presented that and gave that to KPF as their contribution, your eyes lit up, Sarah. You were real excited about it.
I was so excited because first off, thank you, Brennan and Hunter. Look at us now. We did it. We took your idea and we're running with it, and we appreciate you for coming up with it. I think that this is a really good way to learn. And it's a really good way to have conversations with people who are your peers, who are going through similar things. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to entertainment podcasts. I listen to informational podcasts. And I really like the ease with which I can be doing the dishes and listening to this. I can drive home in my car and listen to this. So we really wanted to provide information to nonprofit leaders, staff members, people in the community. If you work at a job, if you're a leader in any job, nonprofit or not, the information that we're going to pass along is going to be useful to you. So I think for me, it was just when I heard them explain the podcast, I was like, yes, I want to do this immediately.
Yeah. And those 2 episodes are available through the Kentucky Psych Foundation website. You can listen to those episodes because there are 2 nonprofit leaders that they interviewed for those kind of pilot episodes, if you will, of the podcast, as well as there's YouTube shorts and there's some infographics and other things that are available through our KPF's website.
And if there are things that aren't there that your organization is looking for or that you need or topics that you want us to discuss on the podcast, you can put those in the comments. We would be absolutely happy to provide you with the information that you need. That's why we're here. We really want to cultivate a community of people that are helping each other navigate issues like burnout in nonprofit organizations.
Yeah. Yeah, this was great, Sarah. I really enjoyed our talk today. I love, again, hearing your story, and I hope that by us sharing our stories and giving a little bit more of a broader understanding of burnout, that this will be beneficial to people who listen to the episode.
Yeah, Courtney, that was the first time I had heard your burnout story. So thank you so much for sharing it. I feel like I want to get really hydrated now.
Yes. The takeaway from the story is everybody
stay hydrated.
Yes, drink your water, stay hydrated. It's very good for your health. And reach out to your leader and be brave, like Sarah. Be vulnerable and reach out for help when you need it.
Yeah. And if you're a nonprofit leader, stay tuned for episodes about cultivating trust amongst your staff so that they feel comfortable having those really vulnerable conversations with you.
So to end our episode, we're going to talk about our ripples of gratitude. So the ripples of gratitude are part of the nonprofit wellness initiative, which, as I mentioned earlier, is created by and supported by students who are in my class. And the idea with this project is that you can intentionally recognize and honor your coworkers and people in your life for the great work that they are doing, which hopefully will inspire them to express their own gratitude for other people, which then will inspire other people to be gracious, and that will ripple throughout our community. And so our first ripple of gratitude is going to go out to Hudson, who is one of my students who actually came up with the idea for the ripples of gratitude. So I want to say how thankful I am to Hudson for his really creative idea and how this could inspire people to create a really unique employee recognition system within their own nonprofit.
Courtney, I cannot think of a single person that is more deserving of our episode 1 ripple of gratitude than Hudson. As soon as I heard him stand up in your classroom and speak about his project, I could tell how passionate he was about it. And it inspired me to make sure that I am going forward and telling people that are in my life, who are in my workspaces, that I appreciate them and I appreciate the work that they're doing. So Hudson, thank you so much for starting our original ripple of gratitude, and today's goes out to you.
Yeah. And so hopefully hearing about Hudson's work and our gratefulness will inspire you all to thank someone in your own life.
Thank you all so much for listening. The Burnout Room is sponsored by the Kentucky Psychological Foundation. If you'd like to help support our work bringing free mental health resources to Kentucky nonprofits, please consider donating at www.kentuckypsychologicalfoundation.org.
A huge thanks to our producer, Nikki Collerich, for all of her amazing work, and to Mike Russell, my father, for composing our music.
And to all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in and being a part of this community. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode, and feel free to leave a comment or share feedback about topics that would be most helpful for you and your organization.
And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.